Well, I think to some extent we became slightly bereft of ideas, and as much as I've always tried to say that we didn't want to make a film that didn't really satisfy the audience, and I didn't purposely do that, some of the later films, we were stretching perhaps a little more than we ought to have to create a sequel because we really wanted to have the sequel. And I don't feel embarrassed or guilty or disloyal to the Nightmare fans for any of the films that we made, and we always tried as hard as we could to deliver good stuff. But I think you could just do so much with the idea, and that it was. And sometimes, as I say, after the initial idea, which even in its crudeness was so effective, that it became increasingly difficult to embellish on it with new stuff. The Freddy is Dead one, which was ostensibly the last one in the formal series. I mean, the most effective thing we could come up with was with this 3D gimmick at the end. And it kind of worked, and I'm happy with the film. I thought Rachel did a good job, but that also was one of the least successful of the series, and sort of signaled to us that we should, let Freddy go for a while. And fortunately, we were in a position corporately to move on to other things.
It's very hard when you get to number 6 to still be speaking something. I mean, Wes wasn't directing number 6, but somebody else was. Somebody had to get on up there every day and direct the actors, and England had to get into the makeup, and the special effects guys had to do their thing. It's hard when you've been going for 6 movies, and England, I guess, is the only common factor, really, through these pictures. The only figure that appears, as it were, in all of them. I think it's very hard to keep the initial energy up.
I go back to Roger Corman days with Rachel, and Rachel was on Nightmare 1, I believe she was like a production accountant. But I've, worked for Rachel and Rachel's husband Rupert over the years on various projects, other things as well. And Rachel's like, she always sort of knew, like she always knew John Waters was, Rachel's, I think, one of the people that really knew it was going to go somewhere. And I think Bob's, had different theories over the years. Robert Shea from New Line, I think, he's been proud of it and a little embarrassed and everything, and it's sort of like, his bastard cousin, this Freddy Krueger thing that he's created,
In terms of my directing the film, I had decided that this is something I really wanted to do. I had worked with enough directors and been producing long enough that I had such a passion for the project. And I had just come off producing the film Book of Love, which Bob Shea had directed. And I thought, well, now's the time. If he, it's hard for him to say, I can be a first-time director, Rach, but you can't. And I thought, well, I've got to do everything I can to get the ammunition together to say, you've got to let me do this, because I had never directed anything. So I went and wrote a story outline for Nightmare 6, with keeping in mind the idea that we would kill off Freddy, and keeping in mind that I wanted to create more story than had been there originally, that had been there for Nightmare 4 and Nightmare 5, where I think they had just sort of collapsed into convolution. So I wanted more of a story, but still keeping the Bible of what I knew worked in the Nightmare series. I was conscious in creating Nightmare 6 that I wanted to make a slightly more fun piece than Nightmare 5 had been. I felt that Nightmare 5 was very serious in sort of its gothic horror elements, and that Hopkins is very much a production designer, and he was very into the gothic elements, and I wanted to, we were creating this, it was actually at the time when Twin Peaks had just come out, and when Mike DeLuca got involved with writing the script, we were both completely in love with Twin Peaks, and I had just come off the John Waters films, and in particular working very closely with John on Crybaby, which was a film full of cameos. And Mike and I came up with the idea that we could probably get a lot of cameos in this film, use the same technique. And I had just been working with Patty Hearst and Iggy Pop, and and that there was the opportunity here to create some, you know, really interesting David Lynchian type characters. So a lot of it actually came out of, a lot of the weirder ideas came out of a combination of watching Carnival of Souls and the Twin Peaks time. And so there's a much sort of more, you know, slightly off-kilter side to my nightmare. The end of Freddy is really a problem. I mean, not only the question of how do you kill Freddy, but also the fact that they made me shoot it in 3D. Because to me, what could have been really cool in killing Freddy would have been if you could have made these really fantastic effects sequence. But I was completely limited in shooting in 3D.
Rachel loved to use what she called a bungee camera. That is essentially a huge 3D camera hanging off a crane, smacked down with bungee cord, so she could like move it fluidly throughout the set, which was very cool, except that the usual wires, the gags that you use to affect these things, you couldn't employ. So you had to create everything as though it were a self-contained unit. So essentially, that made for more hard work in the lab.
So suddenly you're in this basement, you know, with a baseball bat that you can put toward camera, and it's become all about how do I make the 3D work, not how do I make the killing of Freddy interesting.
The ideas were very disturbing. The idea that a deaf kid gets his ear sliced off, that we couldn't cheat that. I mean, we made a head that we sliced an ear off of, and it had to be reattached for for its second take. So it really moved away from the point where you're creating a special effect and you're doing a documentary. You're actually building things that do these things.
And it wasn't until a couple of weeks before we finished the film, that we even knew that the 3D was going to work. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And we looked at stuff where we came out with the worst headaches, you know, where stuff wasn't quite aligned. And now most people are seeing the film on video, not in 3D. And they're like, what is this, you know, God, this is so lame. And they're these lame visual effects. What I'm happy with the demise of Freddy was the whole telling of Freddy's backstory and going into Freddy's head and things like that. I thought that was really a good idea, and I think it's really interesting ideas. I think actually killing Freddy with his own glove, you know, personally, I should of course be here saying it's brilliant, but